Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges, as he explores turning the page on his life and yours.
Welcome, friends, to the next chapter with Charlie, where we explore thoughts of understanding the self in light of everyday life. My guest today is James Twyman, an Episcopal Franciscan priest. I didn't even know I wasn't even familiar with the vocation, and I can't wait to find out more. But even more important is James' lifelong dedication to world peace. And I must admit, world peace is something beyond my imagination. So I'm quite excited to talk to James. James, welcome to the show. I'm so interested in chatting with you today in a lively conversation.
Thank you, Charlie. It's great to be here, and I'm looking forward to it as well.
Okay, so you have been called the troubadour of peace, and I am, this is my understanding, your mission is largely about depolarizing the world from our own thoughts of what is right. Is that close?
Well, yes. Depolarization, I think, is something that is so needed and required today, because we are probably more polarized around the world, but especially in the U.S., than we ever have been before. And the peace troubadour part goes back a little further. That was something that was given to me about actually 30 years ago. This month is the first time that I performed the peace concert, and ever since then, traveling to countries at war or in conflict to share this music, these prayers, this vision of peace, and trying to get people to see that peace is what we all really want. We may have different ways of going about seeking it or finding it, but if we could realize the simple truth that we are all really wanting the same thing and just cut ourselves some slack and everything else, I think the depolarizing nature of love will bring us back together.
Oh, I love that, the depolarizing nature of love. My son will be 33 years old in a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. And, he's a baseball player, but he's sort of a philosophical baseball player. And he's a deep thinker. And he just came to the conclusion that peace is what everybody wants. Peace is what we need. And that was his conclusion of just watching life, on a baseball field and watching it from his perspective of life. And then I was telling him, because like you, I'm a student of the Bible. And, peace is so common in the scriptures. And that Jesus' peace is a different kind of peace. It's a whole different kind of peace. We need peace from war. And I think Jesus was talking, certainly there wasn't wars to be talked about then, so that wasn't a current issue. But what do you think, what does peace mean to you?
Well, first of all, I would disagree about Jesus in the sense that this is a country that was occupied.
Oh, yeah, it was occupied, but there was not a physical war like we're having now.
No, it was a physical
oppression.
Oppression, exactly.
Yeah.
And to be in a country that is oppressed by a mighty empire, I can't even begin to imagine. And this is why the Jewish people were always expecting a very particular type of Messiah, one that would bring peace through war, that would somehow help the Israelites rise and conquer their oppressors. And yet, Jesus was much more of an upside-down teacher. He taught that we should love our enemies, that we should do good to those who hate us and bless those who curse us. And if you could think about that from the perspective of the Jewish people living in Palestine at that time, hearing that while oppressed by the Roman Empire must have sounded very strange indeed. But once again, everything Jesus taught was the opposite of what we are usually taught in the world. And I think this is very interesting evidence that we're not going to be able to accomplish anything really from the perspective of the mind or the intellect or the ego. It's going to be when we turn everything around, maybe turn it upside down as Jesus did, and realize that not only is peace something that we want, but it's something that is inherent to each one of us. And if I'm willing to lay aside my animosity for everyone, including, say, someone who's oppressing me, a country that maybe is wanting to do battle, or even another person who just thinks differently than me, if I can realize that this person is my brother or my sister, and that we all really want the same thing, then this upside down thinking brings us right side up. That, I think, was the beautiful thing that Jesus taught us 2,000 years ago and is here to teach us today, especially at a time when people are being torn apart by just having different ideas. We have this need to be right, what I like to call the pandemic of being right.
I love that phrase, by the way.
Yeah, I think it resonates with people. They hear that and think, oh my gosh, is it really so simple as to realizing that I don't have to be right, that me loving you and respecting you and be kind to you even when you disagree with me, that this is an answer that can change the world. In fact, what I like to say is most of the things that I'm talking about today, especially in light of my new book, which I have right here, we'll talk about, I'm sure, I don't know, maybe, I love you, that most of the lessons are lessons that we learned in kindergarten. Be kind, listen, respect one another. These are lessons that we've lost and need to be rediscovered if we in our relationships in our country and in the whole world are going to try and come back together and to have a meaningful relationship and dialogue again.
Yeah, the last place I think we want to look for education in how to live life is our educational system. Reading, writing, and arithmetic are not telling us how to deal with our neighbor, how to deal with life, how to deal with the troubles. Those have to come from another inspiration. And I do want to thank you for correcting me, because you are, as a true Franciscan, you're right on. I completely concur. But what peace, what do you think for you? There is a certain peace I have found for me, a certain peace within myself, a peace with who I am, a peace with my identity. I don't require any longer. See, I'm older, I've got a couple of years on you. I'm 75. Wow. I don't need others' affirmation of my identity. I've already let that go. Richard Rohr in his book, Falling Upward, that all came with the first half of life, of establishing identity. It was important to establish an identity. That way, I had something to die to. I needed to own that very helpful way of thinking. It was helpful for that time of life, but it is not helpful for leaders of life, for wisdom of life. And I don't need other people's approval. I'm at a place, James, where I don't need to win arguments. I don't get into arguments. When it starts moving into the argumentative phase, I just say, time out, guys. I've lost interest in our conversation.
Yeah, we are in the midst of a great dissolve. And that's what this time of life is all about. We are dissolving the very thing that has kept us separate from one another, our identity, how we identify ourselves. And we have to constantly reinforce that. And one of the main ways that we reinforce our identity is by being right. And when we think that we're right, if someone agrees with us, well, then great. They're on our side. They're on our team. But if someone disagrees, and this pandemic is out of control, which it certainly has been. And I'm not talking about the COVID pandemic. I'm talking about the pandemic.
The pandemic of being right.
And when this becomes such an important thing, then what happens is we form these little tribes of rightness. I will only hang out with people that agree with me. I'm not going to listen to anyone else. And even our social media and many of the things that we rely upon reinforce this. The algorithms that only tell us what we already believe. For example, if I went onto YouTube or anywhere else and was searching for videos that were anti-vaccine, well, the algorithm just figures that's what I want to hear, and it gives me only that. And therefore, it makes it easy for me to say, well, I must be right because everyone I'm listening to agrees with me.
Right.
But the reason they agree with me is because the algorithms are only giving me that. They're only giving me what I already believe rather than letting me hear other perspectives. So I'll tell you how this book came about, because it's a story in.
And I need to talk to you about the title, because the word maybe, I don't know which line it refers to, the former or the latter. So,
well, I'll tell you the story, and then it will make sense. So this was toward the beginning of COVID. I was having a discussion with my younger brother. And because he's younger than me, our entire lives, he's been trying to get ahead and prove himself. And so he loves to argue. And we do have different perspectives often. And we were talking about something, though I don't remember what it was. And I have to be honest, it seemed like he was winning. So I said 3 things to him. I said, Kenny, I don't know. Maybe I love you. And he said later, I hate when you do that. How can I keep the argument going when you say things like that? And I realized you're right. You can't keep the argument going when there's nobody pushing back. Because here's the thing. When it comes to that argument or anything else, I don't know. None of us do. I have my opinion. I have my perspective, but I don't know for sure that my opinion is the correct opinion. So maybe if I listen to you, maybe if I give you some respect, maybe I'll hear something that will help me to go even deeper. But the primary foundation has to always be love and respect. So I don't know. Maybe I love you becomes a kind of mantra. And the funny thing is, I said that a couple of times to him, and then I started talking about it at many of the lectures that I was giving. And almost every time people would really connect with it. And a couple of days later, I would hear conversations and people would just throw it into the conversation. Oh, I don't know. Maybe I love you. So I thought, well, maybe I should write it down. But at that point, I had already written 23 books, and I wasn't really interested in writing another one. But I was in New Hampshire, actually. I had driven my van all the way from Portland, Oregon to New Hampshire, and I was doing an Eastern tour of a musical, a one-man musical that I wrote and performed on the life of St. Francis of Assisi. And I was having dinner with my friend Walt and his wife Anne, who actually I just had a Zoom call with right before this interview. Walt and Anne. And we were having dinner, and I didn't know Anne, and I learned during that dinner that Anne owns a publishing company. And we were talking about books, and I said, I have no intention of writing any more books, but if I did, this would be the book I would write. So I told her that story about my brother. And she said, if you write that book, I will publish it. I thought, okay, well, I guess I'm writing the book. So
you've got a publisher. Yeah.
I mean, it wouldn't have been hard for me to get a publisher because, I've worked with many, but it took someone hearing that and saying, yes, this is something that we need today. So what I did, I went back to, because my van is a little camper van, so I would sleep in my van. And that night I just started writing. The next morning, I I went out to a cafe right there in the town of North Conway, New Hampshire, and I saw a man. This is right before the 2024 election, right? So signs are everywhere. Everyone's backing their candidate, and there was a man right in the downtown area of North Conway with his car covered in Trump signs, carrying a sign that said, "Vote Trump or else." I thought, this is where I start. This is someone I can begin with, because I'm not going to agree with him, and he's not going to agree with me. We have different perspectives. So if I can begin to practice this on him, which just means to listen to him, to respect him, to stay in that space of, I don't know, maybe I love you, then maybe something could happen. So I walked out of the cafe and just said hello and asked him a few questions. I think he grokked me immediately as being someone who would have a different political opinion than him. But he also realized that I wasn't trying to convince him of anything. I wasn't trying to tell him he was wrong and that I was right. So he began to relax, and we had a really wonderful discussion. He shared his perspective, and then he asked me to share mine, which I did. And even though at the end, neither one of us had convinced the other that we should change our vote, but we experienced something even deeper. So I started just having these conversations as I went down the East Coast doing my concerts. And then as I drove all the way back to Portland, Oregon, just talking to people and listening to them. And that's what this book is all about. Conversations that can help us receive the tools for what I like to call being depolarizing agents. That's what I think we need. We need a movement of people who are saying, I want to be part of this. I want to help depolarize this very polarized world. Because what we need to do is to come back together, or like we said in the very beginning of the interview, to realize that we have a lot more in common than we have different.
You know what's difficult though, James? A lot of people, like your Trump person with all the stickers and with this deep-seated certainty of correctness, there are friends that I've noticed that have that are unwilling, or not necessarily maybe unwilling, but unwilling, and even more importantly, incapable. It's the way I view. If I just take a look at Fox News and CNN, neither one are journalists. They're evangelists. They're preaching a cause, and they have no interest. They have no interest in finding out anything else about the other cause, about the other person's opinion. That is not valuable. And so, you know what word really works for me, that has kept me. And it's a driving word for me. It's not a word that I just said, oh, I need to develop this. It has been an important word my entire life, and that is curiosity.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that.
I'm just curious. For instance, I'm reading a poet right now. His name is Drew Jackson. And I've met Drew. I've heard him in lecture. I've heard him do presentations. He's a black man, but he doesn't talk about the oppression of the black people. Doesn't talk anything about that. And so when I read his poetry, oh my God, his poetry, he writes from a black man's perspective, and he explained to me, because we have become friends, and he explains to me, when he writes poetry, this is his form of self-reflection, self-reflective journaling. He is not very good at reflecting the self except in journaling. And he was journaling conversations with the Gospel of Luke. And he got so vulnerable. I wonder if he even realized, he must have realized how vulnerable he got in the oppression that he felt as a black man. And there would be points that I might disagree with or don't understand, but instead of disagreeing You know what my response was? I don't understand. I'm learning. This is different than what I would think, but I took a look at his lifestyle, his upbringing, the way he was raised, everything about it, and his experience. You know, he talks about experience with the white man oppressing him. And it's horrendous. And I just want to understand. What if we came to it? I want to understand. I'm curious. Tell me about what's driving you to this point.
Curiosity, as you just said, is one of the first and most important tools that we have in depolarizing. It's the thing that seems to be lacking the most. We just assume someone has a different opinion or a different experience, and we just assume that they're wrong or that there's no way that I can relate to that. But we can relate if we are simply curious, and it comes from asking questions.
Yes.
Can you tell me more about that? How did you come to that experience? To instead of pushing away, invite someone in. Questions invite people in. They invite responses. Instead of saying, I don't get you, I don't understand what you're writing about or what you believe. Instead of saying that, ask them, tell me more. Help me to understand this. That's what I did with the man there on the streets of North Conway. My usual attitude would have been, don't deal with him. You know, he's kind of crazy. He's out there waving his Trump sign, and
he does sound kind of crazy, to tell you the truth.
Yeah. From my perspective, it was kind of crazy, and I could have kept him in that box. But instead, I got curious, and I walked over to him and said hello. And I said hello to a lot of other people, some of whom agreed with me, some of whom did not. Another example would be when I was traveling down the East Coast, my very best friend, her name is Vicky, and she lives in New Jersey. You could ask anyone who knows Vicky, and they will tell you that she is probably the most loving, holy person they've ever met. A real saint, truly.
Okay.
And I was surprised to learn when I got to her house that she is an avid Donald Trump supporter.
Okay.
It didn't line up for me because my own prejudice was that if you're a good, loving person, you would never support someone like Donald Trump. This is my prejudice. I take full responsibility for it. And instead of saying, Vicky, I can't believe you, I don't want to deal with you, I can't be friends with you, any of these things that are happening so regularly now, instead of saying any of those things, I just got curious. And I said, I'm surprised. Tell me more. Tell me why you think he's a good choice. And she did. And she explained her perspective. And she had a lot of really good points that I had never considered. So me saying, well, maybe there's something I can learn here, opened my perspective, my window a bit more. And our relationship, the love that we share for each other, was never challenged because that need to be right it would sneak in. Of course, because we're human. It would every now and then I would say, oh my gosh, I can't believe you just said that. That's not true at all. But I would realize what I was saying and come back to that place of neutrality where I'm not here to be right. I'm not here to convince you. I'm here to love you, to have compassion for you. And maybe if we can do that for each other, we're going to break through this time that we seem to be in right now. And by the way, you mentioned St. Francis a couple of times. I like to say that Francis, this is my sweatshirt is for my Franciscan community, Francis and Claire.
And Claire.
St. Francis and St. Claire obviously lived in Assisi, Italy at the same time. And it was a very similar time to what we're experiencing today. There was great separation, wars, so many things I could tell you. One example would be that by the time Francis died, a quarter of all of Europe were Franciscans. Now, Most of them were.
I had no idea the Franciscan order was that large.
Yeah. Most of them were third order Franciscans. The third order are the lay people who have families and jobs,
Right.
who are there to try and live this ideal within the context of their relationships and family. And one of the vows that they would take is to not take up arms. Okay. So the fact that there were so many thousands of people who were taking that vow, these great lords who were raising armies to fight these battles could no longer raise enough people to.
And what era was that?
An army. Yeah. And the feudal system just kind of evaporated pretty quickly after that.
What era was that?
I'm sorry?
What era was that?
So Francis died in 1220.
Just
6, I think.
3 years before Bonaventure was born.
Yes. Yeah, very good. You know your Franciscan history.
I'm big into Bonaventure.
Bonaventure's great.
Francis and Bonaventure are just huge in my life.
Yeah. So we live in a very similar time. And the fact, okay, let me tell you something. In fact, I'm going to ask you a question. It's a very interesting point. This is someone said this, and I want to see if you can guess who. Someone, and this was not it was a while ago, but not a terrible, it wasn't hundreds of years.
Oh my God, you're picking an old man with a crappy memory. So
you probably won't figure it out, but I love asking people. Now and then someone says the right answer. Here's what they said. If we had had 10 St. Francis of Assisi, we wouldn't have needed a revolution. Any idea?
No.
A lot of people say Lenin, like John Lennon, and they're not right, but it is Lenin. It was Vladimir Lenin.
Vladimir Lenin, really?
Yes. The leader of the Bolshevik Revolution.
And that was what they were about. That was, it started, the whole deal started from really wonderful motivation, just got, like anything political, got screwed up.
Yeah, because we're human.
Yeah.
But yeah, even Vladimir Lenin recognized that even a small group of fully dedicated people can change the world. Margaret Mead put it best. Never think that a small group of dedicated people can't change the world. The truth is, that's the only thing that ever has.
The only thing that ever has. It's always, and to the positive and negative, because to the positive, a small group of people changed the world. I was executive coach to the CEOs of the company, and we always realized that the real change agents were middle management, not upper management. It was the middle management who gets stuff done. They're the ones that make the big changes. So it's a small group of people. But now what we have is that we have the loudness of the small group of people, the noise made by the progressive left and the extreme MAGA right. Their noise reverberates and is stronger than the noise of anybody else. And so that's one of the polarizing elements of our country. And the divisiveness comes from the extremes when the majority of us, James, from what I understand, and I'm not a fact checker. I read the news. I read the Free Press and Access News every day. The majority of Americans are right in the middle. We kind of like all agree, and yet this loud noise, and they're taking over that small group of people. They're becoming that small group of people that will not agree, and they cause divisiveness.
One of the things that I've noticed, especially since COVID, I think so much did change during the COVID pandemic. It used to be, it was very linear. You had the people on the far, far left, you had people on the far, far right. Okay. And they couldn't have disagreed more.
Right.
They were always the opposite. What happened during COVID is that straight line started to become more like a circle. And people on the far left were watching many of the same programs and interviews as people on the far right. And they started to say the same things. For example, COVID deniers or vaccine people who are against the vaccine.
Right.
The far left, the far right were saying the same thing, and yet the voices were getting louder and louder and louder. So what might have been, say, 7 or 8% over here and 7 or 8% over here began to grow to maybe 10, 12, 15%. But even if it was 15% on both sides, that's only 30% total. You still have that 70% of people who are ripe and ready to play their role in depolarizing, bringing us back together. That's the only thing that's going to happen. We can't get drowned out by, a small group of people. We have to be dedicated. We have to be bigger. And, people who are in the United States, this is our heritage. And we can't continue this divisiveness. Otherwise, we are falling apart. It's obvious.
Yeah.
But we're not going to be able to come together unless we step back, realize, I don't know what all the answers are. I have my opinion, but I don't know. Neither do you. Neither do any of us. Maybe if we listen to each other, respect one another, something new will happen. And if we have that foundation of love and compassion for one another, respect, then I think something can happen. So what I suggest and what I ask people to do is to, getting the book is always a good thing. Obviously, that's why
I'll put that on the show notes. I've got a couple things on the show notes.
Yeah,
I'll make sure I get the book on the show notes.
To go to the website, which is de-polarized.com.
Got it. It's already on there.
Yeah, and there's a 1-minute survey people can take that it is really helping us to really define closely what we need to continue this movement. And I want people to join the movement. Once again, even if it's a small group of people, if we're dedicated to this, then we can work miracles together.
You know what's happening for me? I am really fortunate. I've had a boatload of injury in my life, and 99% of it is self-inflicted. So there's no blame to go around. It's me. But I nevertheless will say I've lived a charmed life. I'm 75 years old. I've had 7 careers. I've been modestly successful. I am entering now, and I'm entering with this intentional phase of eldership, and viewing elder is very important, and it's a neglected role. So I'm feeling like I'm almost having to create the role, and it's not what I say, it's what I do. It's my presence. It's a way. Rick Rubin writes about it in his book, The Creative Act, which I think is subtitled A Way of Being. It's a way of being, and it's a way of being accepting and curious and loving. And my example is my son is a ball player. They have no personal life. They get 2 to 3 days off a month, during season, which is 7 months out of the year, 100, including spring training. It's over 180 games a year if you don't play in the playoffs. And you just don't get time off. So he doesn't have time to do anything. So he has 2 assistants. One is about 40 and the other is about 35. They always view me as elder. They call me dad, but I decided to assume that role differently rather than, I don't want to be a proclamation of wisdom, a proclamation of the right thing to do, the right thing to think. Instead, I just want to show by my love and acceptance. I show a curiosity. So the last couple times I visited, I just don't, I don't say as much. I listen a boatload, ask a boatload of questions. And as a result, James, I got to tell you, I had to come back from spring training. I had to come back to the house to do something. I met with one of the guys. We sat for half an hour, and this guy lives with a very troubled childhood. He's never explained the details. And just because I was in a listening mode and he caught that I was in a listening mode, he just gushed forward, and it felt like so much of who he was came out. And then a word that you use a lot, don't you use the word connection a lot?
Oh, yeah.
And that the connection was there. Our relationship will never be the same. We'll never go back. It will always be better. It will always be enhanced. And that was because I was not trying to proclaim anything right or my opinion or my wisdom as an old guy. That old guy wisdom bullshit is just it's just wrong. The wisdom of an old guy is to love.
Yeah, you're reminding me of two more St. Francis examples.
Perfect.
First is my favorite quote is when Francis said, "Our only job is to preach the gospel wherever we go, but only when necessary. Use words."
Use words.
Mm-hmm. Presence, like you said. And this is how we move people. This is how we grow ourselves, by just being the example, be vibrating, being the frequency, not proclaiming, not trying to convince, or any of the power struggles that we have used in the past, which have never worked. The other thing is, my favorite story about St. Francis was when he decided that he could end the Crusades by simply going to the battlefield and meeting with the great Sultan al-Kamil of Egypt. The Sultan al-Kamil, he was the leader of the entire Islamic world. And obviously the Crusades had been going on for decades, and there was a great battle going on at a place called the Fortress of Damietta. And so Francis was going to go there against everyone's advice, and he was going to talk to the Sultan. Of course, everyone said, "You're never going to get to talk to him. They're going to kill you. They're going to arrest you. You're going to be whatever." He said, "I don't care. I'm going to go." And so he, with one of his brothers, went. I think that they must have thought that they were Sufis or something when they approached the fortress,
Sure.
because they just let them right in. But as soon as they realized who they really were, they were arrested. But the Sultan was so curious, here's that word again, that these two brothers would travel all that way just to talk to him, that he gave them an audience. Well, that one talk lasted 2 weeks. Francis and Illuminato stayed there at Damietta for 2 whole weeks, not only with the Sultan, but also with the Sultan's teacher, whose name was the Fakir el-Din el-Farisi, who was the greatest Sufi of that time. So Sufism and Franciscanism are very aligned. Okay, I would say that the Sufis are the Franciscan element of Islam, right? So they found brothers in each other, and they were lovers of peace. So what happened when Francis finally left, the Sultan, through Francis, gave an offer of peace, and Francis took that, but the Cardinal Pelagian, who was there, was determined, nope, we're going to slaughter them. So he didn't accept the peace agreement. What happened then was the Crusaders were approaching the Nile. If they were able to conquer that area and cross the Nile, Egypt would be theirs, and then the Holy Land. So as they approached the Nile, they were in a very low area. The Sultan did something very smart. He opened up the floodgates and flooded the entire lower region where the Crusaders were. And they were trapped there. They couldn't move. They couldn't get their horses or their carts out. And they were there for weeks. And they were starving and beginning to catch diseases. So what did the Sultan do? He could have just sent in his army and slaughtered them all, and the war would have been over. But I believe it's because of the interaction that he had with Francis. He did something very different. He out-Christianed the Christians. He sent his own soldiers in to feed them, to help them. And when they finally got out of this mud, what could they do but turn around and go back to Europe? I think it's a very interesting example.
Beautiful example.
Isn't it a beautiful story of what can happen when the enemy is no longer seen as the enemy, but when we realize once again that we want the same thing? If that can happen 800 years ago, I really believe it can happen today.
You know, I want you to help me here. I was writing about it, knowing that we were going to speak today. I journal daily. And I was writing in my journal today about world peace. And, that's why I even said in our introduction something about even more important is James' lifelong dedication to world peace, something beyond my imagination. Because I don't feel that there's a lot I can do about world peace, about what Charlie Hedges can do in the Orange County bubble about the world of peace. I'm too old to protest. I give money to certain causes, but they're always not peace causes, but they're helping causes. I help people needing water. In Africa, I served in Africa for 7 years for water. What I can do, and I would like to tell me what you think of this. What I can do is I can create, and I love the word presence because that's a big word in my life. I can be a presence in my world, a presence of peace and love, and my gifts are to inspire, influence, and to encourage. So I can be an inspiration, an influence, and encouragement toward love in my area. And and it's not just my buddies. I will pick, I work with a group of people a couple cities away that work with the homeless, not the homeless, but the immigrants and illegal immigrants. So I can do some things there. But as far as world peace, it's beyond my capacity. Maybe it's my age. I don't know what. I wonder, I think most people, or many people, think that as a result as well. What are your thoughts?
Well, there's a very famous prayer that I'm sure you will recognize that is often attributed to St. Francis. Make me an instrument of your
peace. Yes.
Now,
we say it every week in church.
Yeah, oh, really? That's great.
That's our closing Eucharistic.
Wow,
wonderful. Or our closing prayer.
Well, Francis did not write that.
I didn't think so. It
was attributed to him. I think what happened was in France, it was maybe the end of the 19th century or the beginning of the 20th century. There was a holy card that was printed and very popular. On one side, there was a picture of St. Francis, and on the other side, it said a simple prayer, and then it had that prayer. So it became associated with Francis. But still, it's a prayer that he would have loved because it speaks to that presence that you're referring to.
Right.
An instrument can't play itself, right? I'm a musician, so I know that. An instrument falls into the lap of the musician, and it's only when the musician strums it or plays it that music begins to fill the air. And it's the same thing with us. Only when we surrender and ask to be made into instruments of peace, which means I don't know what I can do. Maybe if I surrender, maybe God will use me. Maybe I could become an instrument of love and peace. And so this is what Francis did 800 years ago. And one more prayer story, even though he did not write that particular prayer, Francis did write a very famous prayer at the very, very end of his life. It was the first prayer that was written and published in Italian, because at that time, each area had its own dialect, and there was no common language. But Francis wrote a prayer in Italian, which is called the Canticle of the Creatures. At this point, on his way back from Egypt, he had contracted a terrible eye disease. He was very, very ill, and he was on his deathbed. and he couldn't see. He was in such pain, but he wrote this prayer in praises of the creatures of God: Brother Sun, Sister Moon, Brother Fire, Sister Wind. And what he did was he taught this song. He wrote it as a song, and he taught it to several of his friars. And he said, I want you to go up to Assisi, because the bishop and the mayor were locked in a terrible disagreement, and it was just causing great chaos in the city. So he sent his friars up, since he couldn't go, to sing this song to them both. So they brought the bishop and the mayor together, and they sang the canticle for the first time. And when they heard it, they cried, they wrapped their arms around each other, and the war was over. Now, that may be one small example, but it just shows that the frequency is the most important thing, which is another word for presence. And one final thing that I've always tried to promote, beginning the first time I went to Iraq I was actually invited there, but by Saddam Hussein in 1998. And I was there to sing these peace prayers from the 12 different traditions. And while I was there, I had some beautiful experiences, but this is in 1998, so the internet was not nearly what it is now.
Sure.
But we sent out an email to about 300 people asking them to be praying at the same time that I was doing the concert there. And it was one of the first examples of a viral email. Millions of people ended up getting that email.
Oh, really?
And millions of people stopped at that given time while I was doing that concert and began to send their love, send their vibration to Iraq. There didn't seem to be any possibility of avoiding another conflict at that time. But I could feel something shift when I did that concert, when so many people were focusing their prayers. And 3 days later, when Kofi Annan arrived from the UN, a peace agreement was signed. So even though you or most people aren't going to be able to go and have a direct impact, we can join together. And that's why, as I said before, I'm really hoping that we can start a movement where people say, I'm going to be part of this. I'm going to help depolarize. So join the movement. Let's get together and just be part of this presence that is going to bring peace to the whole world, I believe.
So that would be your advice. I want to wrap up with this. That would be your suggestion for Francis developed and also just sort of, not forced his way in, but moved his way into a lot of places. I mean, he had meetings with the Pope that nobody, I mean, he wasn't a priest. He was, what's a priest doing talking to Francis of Assisi? And what about the rest of us that aren't fortunate like you to be in a place to ask for 1 million prayers to support this spectacular effort in Iraq, that we can't do that? What is, I explained my role in your, the way I view my role. What do you view? How can the people listening to this, how can they be promoters of peace in the world?
Well, even though you and most others don't have the ability or the whatever it is to inspire millions of people, you can be one of those million. So join the movement. In other words, don't worry about any of the details. It's always in the details that we get bogged down. So once again, one of the ways that you can do that is by going to the website, de-polarize.com, and just take that simple little survey. It'll take you 1 minute. If that helps us, maybe get the book. Start being more curious when people disagree with you. Remember the lessons that you learned in kindergarten, to respect one another, to listen to one another, to be kind to one another. If we can just remember these simple lessons, then the rest of it starts to happen on its own.
Yes.
I think we're in the position that we are in today because we've simply forgotten these very simple things that we learned when we were very young.
I agree. I love that. That's it. James Twyman, you know, there is a pandemic of being right. It is going on. We have to, and maybe we change the pandemic of being right is the glory of being lovingly curious. Tell me about yourself.
Yeah. Tell me more. Ask questions. Be curious. It's not very hard, but in order to do it, we have to lay down our sword and stop trying to convince everyone else of what we think and listen more to what they think.
Yeah. And you know, and a helpful point there, no one cares. You know, no matter how much you think your point is important, people don't care. They don't have time. So, you know, you're talking to the wind. You know, you're talking to, you're being Kohelet and talking to the Ecclesiastes. You know, you're just talking in vanity. James Twyman, thank you so much for being on the show. And I also want to thank everybody for tuning in to the next chapter with Charlie. And until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.